Today, we're going to dive into the very first attempts by English settlers to make a life in America. And these aren't just simple stories of hardship. Nope. These are the super fragile, really uncertain beginnings that would eventually shape an entire nation. And it all kicks off with what is basically a ghost story.
I mean, seriously, just think about that for a second. We're talking about over 100 men, women, and children. They built houses, they're starting a new life, and then, poof, they just vanish off the face of the earth, leaving almost nothing behind. How does that happen?
Okay, so maybe not nothing. This one single word, just carved into a fence post, that was the only clue they left. A super cryptic message that has had historians scratching their heads for more than 400 years.
So let's start with the Roanoke Colony, founded way back in 1587, and now it's forever known as the Lost Colony. Its governor, a guy named John White, had to sail back to England for some desperately needed food and supplies. He figured he'd be gone for a few months, tops. But things happen. A war broke out between England and Spain, and he got stuck there for 3 long years. And when he finally made it back, he found a ghost town. The houses were gone, the people were gone, and there was zero sign of a struggle. Just that one single mysterious word.
Right, so what happened? The theories are all over the place. Could they have tried to move somewhere else, only to be killed by another tribe? It's possible. Or maybe they just blended in with the friendly Croatoan tribe, leaving that word as a clue to where they went. That one kind of makes sense, right? But then you get theories like a massive hurricane wiping them out, which has one giant flaw. How in the world would a single fence post with that carving still be standing after a storm like that? It just doesn't add up.
Now, to really understand what these colonists were walking into, we have to zoom out. I mean, way, way out. Because this land wasn't some empty wilderness, not even close. It had a deep, ancient history all its own.
And wow, this timeline really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? What's just staggering to think about is how long people were living here before any Europeans showed up. We're talking tens of thousands of years of complex societies, huge trade networks, and vibrant cultures. When you look at it that way, a few English ships arriving isn't the start of a story. It's just a tiny, recent blip on a very, very long timeline.
So, the big thing to remember is this. The New World wasn't new, and it definitely wasn't empty. It was home to about 2 million people, living in all kinds of diverse nations who had been here for generations beyond counting. These colonists weren't stepping into a vacuum. They were stepping into someone else's world.
Which of course brings up a massive question. What on earth would drive people to risk a deadly, months-long ocean voyage to a world they knew almost nothing about?
I mean, why would you leave everything you've ever known behind?
Well, at first, guys like Columbus were really just looking for a shortcut to Asia, but pretty quickly the reasons got a lot more personal. You had people fleeing nonstop wars, people looking for the freedom to practice their religion without being persecuted, or, people just hoping for a shot at a better life. For so many, America started to look like pure opportunity, whether that meant finding gold or just having a piece of land to call their own.
All right, so this is where we get to the first 3 major English attempts to build a permanent colony in North America. And it's probably best to think of them as 3 totally different experiments in survival, each one with its own unique recipe for success. Or, for failure.
This table gives us a fantastic side-by-side look. You see Roanoke? It was all about making money, but it failed because it was just too isolated. Then you have Jamestown, a purely business deal, which almost starved to death before it finally struck gold. Well, tobacco. And then there's Plymouth, founded for religious freedom, which made it because they built such a strong, tight-knit community.
Okay, let's start with Jamestown. You can basically think of it as a startup, funded by the Virginia Company. Their goal wasn't to build some new society. It was to find gold and make a profit for their investors back home. But the whole venture almost went belly up right away, during a horrible winter that became known as the Starving Time.
I mean, they were dealing with a perfect storm of problems. The place they settled was swampy and full of disease, they got there too late in the year to plant any crops, and they had a really tense, often violent relationship with the powerful Powhatan tribes. The colony was hanging on by a thread.
But then this one settler, a man named John Rolfe, he has a light bulb moment. He starts playing around with a different, sweeter kind of tobacco from the Caribbean, and it turns out people back in England absolutely loved it. And listen, it is hard to overstate how much this one plant changed everything. Tobacco became Virginia's gold. It turned a failing, miserable settlement into a booming business and pretty much set the economic foundation for the entire colony. It was a total game changer.
So to grow all that tobacco, you need a lot of workers.
This is what led to the system of indentured servitude, where people would basically agree to work for free for several years to pay for their trip to America. And it's really important to note that the first Africans who were brought to Jamestown in 1619 came with this status, as indentured servants, not as slaves for life. But this system, which was built on labor that wasn't free, laid the groundwork for what would later become the brutal, race-based slavery that defined so much of the American South.
Now let's totally shift gears and talk about Plymouth. The people here weren't part of some big company. They were religious separatists. They believed the official Church of England was totally corrupt and they wanted out. So their very first act, before they even set foot on land, wasn't to search for gold. It was to write and sign this document. It was a simple promise to work together and create a government with fair laws. For its time, this was a totally radical step toward governing themselves.
So right here, you can see these two completely different recipes for survival. Jamestown was all about profit. It was saved by capitalism, plain and simple, by finding a hit product. Plymouth, on the other hand, was saved by its social contract. Their shared beliefs and that compact held them together through an absolutely brutal first winter. A winter they only survived thanks to critical help from Native Americans, especially a man named Squanto who taught them how to actually plant corn and live in this new place.
Okay, so we've looked at these three wild, desperate stories of survival. What's the big takeaway here? What were the key ingredients that let these tiny, fragile settlements eventually grow into the 13 colonies and then a nation?
Well, it seems like it all boiled down to a few crucial things. You had to have some kind of economic engine, like tobacco in Jamestown. You absolutely needed a shared purpose, a sense of community, to pull you through the toughest times. You had to figure out a way to govern yourselves. And, critically, your survival depended on how you handled the complex and often dangerous relationship with the people who were already living there. But maybe most of all, you just had to adapt. You had to learn, and learn fast, or you were going to die.
So in the end, you've got these three stories. One is mystery, one is about profit, and one is about faith. Together, they really set the stage for everything that came next. They created this template, this mixture of conflict, the drive for wealth, and the search for community. And that powerful, complicated mix, well, that's something that would echo through American history for centuries to come.